In this lesson, we're going to learn how to speed up our workflows by pre-rendering completed work so that we're no longer evaluating that branch of our node graph. So I'll just open up the scene file here where we have a somewhat complicated node graph. Now, of course, when we're working in NUKE, everyone has a slightly different workflow. But usually, I work on a specific area at a time. So for example, if I have my creature finished or completed, I'm not really worried about the nodes far up unless they're causing me problems. So if I usually work at the bottom of the node tree, it's going to be slow to update. If I unpause my viewer here, you can see that a lot of this slowness comes from nodes near the top. And of course, the image has to filter through all of these nodes before I can begin processing it here at the bottom. Now, to speed this up, we can pre-render a lot of these nodes into a sequence so that we can speed up our workflow down here. For example, just to see how slow this is, I'm going to change this transform here, and we'll just wait for this to update. Now, of course, depending on the speed of your processor and the speed of your system and your disk cache, this may or may not take a while. But as we can see here, it would be nice if we didn't have to do this processing every time we wanted to change a value. Now, of course, with this technique comes some problems, but before we get into that, let's actually just do the technique. All right, so let's come in here and let's say everything after our color correct 12 or right before our light wrap is ready to go. Well, I'm going to make some space here and then drop a right node in between my color correct and my light wrap. Now, this is going to change the composite because we're only keeping the RGB channels past this line here, past this right node. So we're going to need to change our channels to all so that we're gathering and storing every single channel above this. Then we'll, of course, need to give this a file name. And let's see here. I want to put this in my project files. And I believe I have a folder in there called, let's see, our footage and pre-render. And so I'm just going to call this something like foreground or pre-render. Foreground, whatever or however you want to name this is completely up to your scene. So we want to make sure channels is set to all, our file type is EXR, and that we're using at least 16-bit. We could use 32-bit if we needed all of that data. And now what we need to do is hit render. So I'm going to hit F7 and hit OK, and this is now going to render out this sequence or this frame. And this is going to take a little while depending on how fast it wants to update or how fast your system is. But once it's done rendering, we can actually now read this in. So there's now two different ways we can do this. We can either hit the R key and grab our sequence or our image we just rendered in and then change the connection over to that. And that is a bulletproof method. We're not going to run into too many problems this way, although it is extra nodes, and if we ever want to change something up here at the top, we're not going to be able to see it propagate down the chain. So another way we can use this is actually to keep it connected into our right node and turn on read file. Now you'll notice here that it says error, that the file does not match the input. And this is going to happen if your check file matches input is on and it's been updated or changed in between the last render and this render. Now this is again where some of the bugs come in. Sometimes this works perfectly, sometimes it doesn't. Usually I turn this off and I just explicitly try and tell myself to remember that if I change anything up here, I'm going to need to come in and rewrite this pre-render. But now, if we come down here to the bottom and do the exact same operation we were doing before, which was changing the scale, we can see that our update is happening much faster. Now, we still might get that bug here, so if that happens, you can uncheck that, and I'm just going to right-click and remove any animation or hit no animation. Seems as slightly buggy, but as we can see now, by pre-rendering the part of the composition we were done with, we now have much faster updating in these other areas or the other parts of our composition. So this is an incredibly powerful tool when you know you've got something approved or when you know you're done working on a branch of your node tree. Come in and pre-render it to speed up your workflow and make sure that NUKE isn't trying to reprocess all of these color corrections, blurs, and so forth every single frame or every single time we make a change, because that is, of course, very inefficient. So I always come in and I pre-render areas of my composition, and I'm able to work much faster and be able to put out many more versions of my compositions because I'm no longer having to reprocess every node for any action. Instead, I'm telling NUKE where I want to be, or where I want it to focus its processing power by feeding it images of work that's already completed. So one last thing, if you want to, you can of course come in and create a preset here, and I've just created one already, but we'll create another one. We can call this pre-render. And now if we wanted to do another pre-render here, let's say after this background area, we can hit our last node here, hit W key, jump down to our pre-render, and we of course need to change the file name, so we can call this our background. And this is not going to be rendered yet, so we can hit F7, hit OK to render this out. And let's uncheck this. And we can see now that we are now reading in the background after we've done all these manipulations to it. So again, it's just that easy. With the preset system and the right node, we can come in and speed up our NUKE workflows at a pretty incredible percentage, depending on the size of your workflow or your node tree. Of course, this gets much faster, or it saves us even more time the larger your NUKE project gets.